I happen to think that that was a mistaken decision. The idea a prime minister should fall for making a judgment of that kind is, to me, risible. And can you see, that's not about stability. It is about a prime minister staying in office long enough amid the swirl of claim and counterclaim so he can set a course that then democracy can correct. Democracy's lost its self-correcting character.
Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister for more than 11 years, Tony Blair for 10. In the last 5 years, we're already on number 4, and it looks like number 5 won't be too far away. Are our political leaders no longer up to the job, or have we become too impatient to replace them? Our challenges as a country are deep and long-term, but our leaders are short-lived, and maybe our perspective is short-term. Have we become ungovernable? Let's talk to the Times columnist, the unmissable Times columnist, I think, Matthew Syed, who joins us now. Morning, Matthew.
Morning, Stig.
So the thesis is this, and you'll be very familiar with it, but I wonder how true it is. In the modern world of social media and tribalism and shoutiness, it is effectively impossible to be in government now.
I think that's a fair point, and I liked your introduction very much. I think we've succumb to a kind of political hysteria where it's very difficult for politicians to think about anything more than the 24-hour news cycle because they're so mortal. Tenure is measured not in years, certainly not in decades, but in months and sometimes weeks. And in those circumstances, setting a long-term agenda, trying to do the painful things that lead to economic growth, facing down the lobbyists and the vested interests becomes very difficult. And it's, we've got to remember, I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer. I'm not a particular fan of the government, but he won a mandate, admittedly a majority in the House of Commons that wasn't reflected in the popular vote. But he deserves an opportunity to lead through this term. And the alternative, if there is a new Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, without a popular mandate, who will not have legitimacy, the markets will tank, the pound will fall, British denominated assets will decline in value. She will not last till the next election. There'll be instant leadership speculation. Then Andy Burnham comes in. Then there's a general election. Then Nigel Farage, the new messiah, who's actually a bit of a naughty boy. He won't last more than 12 months. He'll be hit by a scandal. The news media will go into a meltdown. There'll be this wonderfully distracting and titillating focus on the leadership again, while the long-term viability of this nation continues to suffer.
So who do you blame for this? Do you blame the politicians? Do you blame the media? Do you blame the public? Or is it a combination, a concatenation of all three?
Well, first of all, I think that we should just acknowledge the beauty of that word, concatenation, which is not used enough, in my view. I do actually think that these things have co-evolved. I think they're simultaneously the political culture being assaulted by 24-hour news cycle, by the instant gratification of social media. But I also think there has been a long-term decline that predated social media in attention spans. In the willingness of Western democracies to set a long-term course. And we see this in ever higher debt. We want to spend now, even if we have to pay interest later, quantitative easing where we print money to sustain consumption with all sorts of downsides in inflation and asset allocation, credit cards. All of this, I think, is quite measurable. And for those who are interested, it's sometimes called steepening time preference. But this is impinging on the way politicians think about the world. You have met politicians, Stig. They live in a permanent fight, flight, freeze psychological scenario. They're frantic. They're frazzled. They're looking at their social media feeds. None of them have the capacity or the bandwidth to think beyond the next 48 hours. The civil service gets sucked into that vortex as well. So yes, it's a concatenation, but it is fundamentally disrupting what we need now more than ever before, which is to manage these hugely consequential transitions, the energy transition, the tech transition, the demographic transition. And
yet, the counter-argument, I think it would be very hard to disagree with everything you've just said there, Matthew. The problem is, does that therefore give a free pass towards stability, where effectively you say, Keir Starmer, you're not very good at your job, You've not done a very good job. You aren't managing to grow the economy. You did appoint Peter Mandelson. You're not honest about why you appointed him, which is the subject of your column on Sunday. It is a huge scandal about how Mandelson has got his fingers into the British power institutes and has been allowed to do that. If the only argument for keeping him is that stability is better than uncertainty, is that a good position to be in either?
What democracy used to do so well, Stig, is the balance between self-correction and stability. In order for democracy to be self-correcting, in other words, for it to rectify mistakes, for it to innovate, there has to be something that it is reacting to. And if, on the other hand, the government is just wallowing around without managing to set a course, how can you course correct? So I agree with you. Stability is not, we shouldn't fetishize it, but there needs to be sufficient stability for a government to set a course that the next government can then correct. If, on the other hand, a government is constantly managing ephemeral scandals of the kind of Mandelson, I don't in any way dispute that Mandelson was a bad appointment. I said so at the time. I think he was hired because of the Epstein connections and because he is slippery, a bit like Donald Trump, who has Epstein connections and is himself a bit slippery. They thought, let's hire a snake because Trump's Washington is a snake pit. I happen to think that that was a mistaken decision. The idea a prime minister should fall for making a judgment of that kind is, to me, risible. And can you see, that's not about stability. It is about a prime minister staying in office long enough amid the swirl of claim and counterclaim so he can set a course that then democracy can correct. Democracy's lost its self-correcting character.
Because what you're saying is that we've lost the time frame of 5 years to swap it for the time frame of 5 minutes, really, is the change in how the world functions.
That's right, Stig, and the tremendous irony, and it's one that I think is turning into a civilizational tragedy, is at the moment we need even longer time horizons than 5 years in order to manage the transition to AI, which is perhaps the most important our species has faced in 250,000 years. We need to be thinking over a 10 to 20 year cycle. If you look at what Xi Jinping in China is doing, what they have in China, they don't have self-correction, but they do have the ability to set a long-term stable goal.
But they also don't have democracy, yeah.
They don't have the as it were, the self-correction of democracy, exactly. But it's a remarkable thing that China is actually managing these transitions better than democracies, because we are incapable of doing what we preeminently need to do, which is to set a direction over a 5-year period at least. And that is just being lost in this frantic, amygdala-hijacked political reality.
I think you're making some very forceful points there, Matthew. Great to hear from you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Matthew Syed there. It was a Churchill quote: "The democracy is the worst form of government until you consider every other form."